Guys, this podcast is brought to you today by Audible. If you go to agencyhour.com/audible, that's AUDIBLE, you'll start your 30-day free trial, and you can even cancel at any time. Audible is the #1 app for listening to your favorite books. No one's got more listens than Audible. Here's the deal. We love Audible. Emily listens to her books while she's driving, cleaning, working, you name it. And hey, look, I'm not a book reader myself, but I'm obsessed with this app. With your new account, you also get ad-free premium audio for on- and offline listening, your own custom library to keep even if you cancel, 30% off exclusive member-only savings, and much more. Go to agencyhour.com/audible to get your free audiobook today. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Agency Hour podcast. And today we have a very special guest, and we're going to get him introduced here in a minute. But my name is Levi, your host as always. We're actually going to try something a little different. I'm going to give Scott the reins for this episode.
Hello.
And Scott is here as well. And that's it. The girls are out. A couple of them went home. Emily's busy. Intern's working away. So it's a boys-only podcast here today.
That's right. Boys Hour on a Friday afternoon.
That's right. And it's what we do best. We got our wine and we got the boys. It's exactly how it should be.
Life is good.
Why is that not the show every week? My question.
It to be honest with you, it is. We just never announce it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
So Scott,
I'm going to hijack this show right now. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott McFadden. I'm a designer here at Pixel and Hammer. And I will be quarterbacking this podcast here. The reason being is that we have a very special guest joining us today. I'd like to welcome my good friend, Josh Crain. Josh, say hello.
Hello there.
Josh is an expat from the great nation of Texas. And I've known Josh, what's it been, like 6 years?
About 6 years, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Josh is a senior pastor at the Meeting House here in Carlisle, and he is a certified StoryBrand consultant, which we're going to dive into in a little bit. Guys, I couldn't be more excited to have Josh on the podcast here today. Not only is he a national caliber public speaker and storyteller, but honestly, he's also one of the most fascinating people I know. From the way he's able to connect ideas to offering insight and context to almost any scenario, to just his knowledge of human psychology and social tendencies. We were just having a conversation on the way over of just emotional intelligence. Josh just has a ton of wisdom and insight to offer, and so I couldn't be more excited to have him on this podcast, sharing some of that wisdom with all of you. So Josh, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thanks, man. That was such a nicer introduction than I was expecting. That I don't know what to say now.
I put time into it so that I could really
clearly
sweeten you up. Is that bad, Levi?
No, hey.
Is it wrong to
you
be
do
prepared?
You. This is your episode.
So we're gonna jump in here. Josh, you've been a pastor. You are a pastor, and you've been a pastor for how long now?
Yeah, in some capacity for maybe 15, 16 years now. In some capacity.
So I think the obvious question is, why? Why do you want to be a pastor? What made you want to be a pastor?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad's actually an evangelist, and my mom had the keys to the church. So I've been going to church since about 9 months before I was born. And I was doing that into high school and then into college. In college, I started reading a lot of philosophy and science.
Yeah.
The philosophy, so I was reading, this was before the New Atheist movement with like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and those guys was really taking shape. Those guys were speaking and writing, but it just wasn't quite a movement yet. But I was reading more like classical atheist voices like Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche and Freud. And I thought that some of their criticisms of Christianity were just devastating. And I just didn't see how you could be a Christian on the one hand and also be someone who desires to be a logical person who affirms what science is discovering and teaching at all times. So I really struggled with faith for a long time and began to walk away from it. In my mid-20s, I stumbled across a number of different philosophers, theologians, and pastors who helped me realize that Christianity wasn't the problem, the version of Christianity I'd kind of been raised in was what I was struggling with. And so I ended up finding a lot of like comfort in realizing the only question I really had to answer for myself was around the person of Jesus. That I think Jesus was worth following or aligning my life around. And then the other stuff, like the miracles, the divinity, all that stuff, I could work that out later. And so that was kind of like my first footstep back into then faith as I was then walked away from it. And then from there, it became more and more meaningful for me. Following after Jesus became a total way of life holistically. And then it was like, man, this has changed me tremendously as a human being. Like I know my terrible tendencies, and I'm a way better person now than I would have been without this. And so I just got so passionate about articulating this gospel message of Jesus in a way that actually makes sense to people who were in the same situation that I was, where it felt like it just didn't anymore. Yeah. So that's how I ended up being a pastor.
I think that's hands down probably one of the best introductions like ever, I'd say. Usually when we tell people on this podcast, like, introduce themselves, they're like, and they just repeat all the stuff I just said about them beforehand. Yeah, my name's so-and-so and I work here and this is what I do. Like, all right. Awesome. I love it.
Like I said, I'm super pumped to have a Josh here, and you're already getting a little taste of that. So Josh, you're a pastor. Presumably you have a mountain of things to do in any given day. Yet you have decided to become a StoryBrand consultant. Yeah. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about, first off, what is StoryBrand and why become a StoryBrand consultant?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So StoryBrand is a framework that says essentially that story is a sense-making device. And so we actually understand the world around us mostly by the way that we understand our own story that we're living out. And so StoryBrand is really it's a marketing tool, is what it is. And it's really about the first interaction that a business would have with its client, and helping the client understand like why this business can help you to have a better life, and in such a clear way that they're not having to burn too many calories thinking about it. So StoryBrand uses the idea of story as a framework in order to help customers understand those two things. I was interested in it because if you're an evangelist, whether that be Christianity or a product evangelist for Apple, you're always trying to clarify your message for other people that they might participate in whatever it is that you're offering them. Yeah. So I originally found out about StoryBrand because we were trying to ask this question: how do we position the gospel in ways that make sense in the 21st century? Because the way it was positioned in the 20th century don't make sense as much anymore to people who are asking the kinds of questions like that I was asking. And StoryBrand helped us to really think through that really well. And then I liked it so much. I think as a pastor, you always need to keep one foot in the church, but one foot in the world all around you. Like otherwise, I don't think you have influence really. Too many people who are in kind of faith-based ministries or even nonprofits can sometimes become so focused on that one world that they struggle to see anything outside of it. Sure. But if you're going to make connections with people who are living in, their concerns, man, they're trying to get to work on time. They're trying to, get their, raise their kids and trying not to murder them. Like no one realizes how difficult kids are till they have them. The idea of kids is fantastic. Actual children are tough. And so that whole concept, this is what people are actually working on. People are trying to grow their businesses. They're trying to be good employees. Some people are just trying to bring money home to put on the table to do the thing they really love, which is, playing the triangle in their garage or whatever it is. So how do you, reach that group of people? And if you don't know them, if you don't hear their struggle, then it's really hard to craft messages that make sense for them or to craft messages that apply to them. Yeah. So one thing that I've been doing some consulting work outside of just StoryBrand for a while now. And the one thing it's really helped me to do, I think, is to keep a really level head and to understand better the struggles that everybody has from a broad range of companies and organizations. And that's just an awesome thing. So I see it as both a way to help others. It's a way to enhance my own marketing message around the things that are most important to me, and a way to keep myself grounded. Yeah,
I think that's great, man. So you hit on it here a little bit, but I'm curious, as a pastor and being part of this church world, and you said having 1 foot in the church and one foot in the world, outside of the church, so to speak. In what ways has StoryBrand really informed what you do as a pastor? And then in what ways has being a pastor informed the ways that you approach your work with businesses and organizations to help them clarify their messages? Like, what has been the marriage of the two?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit more about what StoryBrand is, so that my answer to how it's informed me makes more sense.
Yeah.
So StoryBrand says that generally the stories that are told and retold over the history of humanity have some really similar pieces to them that are fairly recognizable to all of us.
Okay.
So basically every story starts with a character. It's a character that's not a hero yet, but has the potential to become one. It's a character who wants something. They have a desire to accomplish something, or to be someone, or to overcome something. But they have a problem. There are these issues that get between them and whatever it is that they want. And so if we think back over movies, could be any number of things. Examples I think that are really easy that most people would be aware of, like Star Wars. Luke Skywalker. His parents, he doesn't have a relationship with them. His aunt and uncle get killed. The Empire is overtaking the entire galaxy. There's this rebellion springing up. He has these gifts, but he doesn't understand them. He has this problem. He wants to overthrow this evil force that's taken the lives now of his family.
Right.
And how do you do that when you're just a snot-nosed kid, on the edges of the galaxy? So that's a problem. That's the character, and that's the tension. Right away, like, he's got to solve this. It's very personal, but it's also, we see how the Empire is damaging the entire galaxy. The Hunger Games is a great one. Katniss has got a problem, which is that she's essentially got to survive. I mean, it's literally life and death on behalf of her district. And so a character has a problem. Once that problem is resolved, the story is not interesting anymore. And so the StoryBrand concept around all this is that your customers have someone they're trying to become, something they're trying to accomplish, and there are problems in their way. And so what are those problems? So StoryBrand says, like, there's always an external problem, but there's an internal problem and a philosophical problem as well. So for, Katniss, the external problem is that she's got to try to win the Hunger Games in order to survive. But the internal problem is really like this doubting, do I have what it takes in order to do this kind of thing? Am I the person I need to be in order to win on behalf of the district? Because there's questions about life and death, and can I take the lives of others, and all that kind of stuff. This real struggle.
Right.
There's philosophical problems as well. So one of the taking that to a product level, let's say you have a wonderful, like, you want your yard to look really good, but you just feel like you don't have time to do it. And so you look to solve that problem. Like, can I hire a landscaper? Can I hire somebody to come mow my yard? That's the external problem you have. The internal problem you might have is one of time, right? Everybody's so busy these days. So, like, the internal problem might be, I feel like my life is so out of control, I don't even have the time for my yard to not look like a friggin' jungle. Like, that's, I have internal angst over that.
Right.
The philosophical problem might be, like, no one should be too busy to even take care of their own house. Like, that's absurd. So people look for solutions to external problems. You might go, like, well, I need a landscaper, I need somebody to come mow my yard. But they buy solutions that really solve the internal problem as well. So what you're looking for is someone to say, like, I'll take care of the yard work for you. Also, you're no longer going to feel like a total loser. Like, your life is spinning so out of control that you can't even cut your own grass.
Yeah.
And we agree with you philosophically that no one should be too busy to even take care of their own home. Like, when you find a company or a person that seems to, they get all those problems and they can make them go away. They can align with you. And that's an amazing thing. So StoryBrand says, like, a character, right, has a problem and they meet a guide. And the big turn for me on StoryBrand is that it says your company is not the hero of the story. Your company is the guide. And too many companies set themselves up as the hero of their own story. Their website is all about how awesome they are. Their marketing collateral is all about how awesome they are.
Right.
And what they don't realize is that people aren't looking for another hero. Everyone's the hero of their own story. So if I talk to you and you're like, I'm awesome, you're like, well, I'm trying to be awesome too. So we're both heroes trying to be the heroes of our story. Great. I'm wanting to conserve calories in my brain. I want to think about how awesome you are. I just want to try to solve my own problems. So if you position yourself and you say, like, you know what, you are Luke Skywalker, but I'm Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm going to help you use the Force. You're Katniss, but I'm Woody from Cheers. I am totally going to help you learn how to get the sponsors you need in order to win the Hunger Games. You position yourself as the guide, and then people realize you're invested in them succeeding. You're invested in them solving their problems, and you're invested in them becoming the hero, because the hero is always the one that changes in the story. The guide knows how to get the hero where the hero needs to go.
Yeah.
So a character with a problem meets a guide, and that's your company. That's, you need to be the guide that can help people to solve their problems. And then that guide has a plan. Like, here's what it looks like for you to succeed. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And in your marketing collateral, then you want to spell that stuff out. StoryBrand says you want to have 3 or 4 steps. It may be actually 50, but you want to look like you have 3 or 4 steps that are really easy to attach to. And
which I feel like is a very common thing that you see with a lot of companies.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Internal processes are complex and
they are
in depth. And in my experience, I've seen so many organizations that feel that because what they do is complex and they want to try to spell out every individual process, and then
or they think it's too complex to say anything about it, right?
right. But then, like, what winds up happening is that in the effort to try to explain everything, you wind up essentially saying nothing because nobody's listening.
That's
right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So if you either overload people with information, their brain's going to shut down because they don't care. They don't see how it benefits them. If you say nothing, they probably aren't going to do business with you because they don't really know what it means to do business with you. And nobody likes to waste money and nobody likes to look foolish on the choices they make. So the guide has to provide at least a bare sense of what the plan looks like going forward. And then StoryBrand also says what the guide does in the best stories of all is it calls people to action. Yoda acts actually at certain points super frustrated with Luke, like use the force and stop being an idiot about it. He's really harsh with him even at times because he really demands like, you've got to do this. And so I see so many companies that have an amazing product that would literally change the lives of the people who choose to purchase it and be a part of it. And they're so hesitant to call people to action because they don't want to look like they're overselling that they don't even give people what their next steps should be. And so they have something that would literally be helpful to the world around them, but they're so hesitant to push people to actually purchase it that people just don't use it. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
Because if you believe in the thing you're doing, you should be willing to tell people, hey, join me for the thing I'm doing, right? It'll improve you.
Yeah. And I think it's a very common sense thing, but like only like a small percentage of the people get it. Like there's it makes, and I always do this on all of our podcasts, but I always take it back to like my own personal thing. Like, right. Yeah. So like I entertain and DJ and film and do photography for weddings, right? Every other DJ you go to has a time limit. They're going to do your wedding for 5 hours at this price. If you want an extra hour, it costs this much. Who knows when we're going to need to know about that extra hour? Yeah. Who has a checkbook? Who's going to pay for it? Do we have cash? Oh my gosh, we forgot the checkbook. Now how do we get them for an extra hour because we're having such a good time? So we eliminated that. Since day one, we've had 0 time limits. We're there all day. I don't care what time the party ends. Like, we're going to have a good time too. And it's just like those little tiny nuggets of like flipping what's is technically working, but it shouldn't be with like our industry or your other clients or Pixel and Hammer, whoever it may be. I think it's just will also just set you apart from that competition, and then in result more sales or more business or more whatever product sold.
That's absolutely true. And so your way of doing business is not the preferred way of every single person,
right?
But there's a clientele that it is. I'm one of those people. Like, I would much rather pay more and know that I've got this for as much as we need of it. Mm-hmm. I've got it for as long as we want it, and not have to worry about that stress anymore. There are other people who'd be more like nickel and dimers. They really want to,
And, by all means, the people who have the time limits and that are doing those, they're a fraction of our cost.
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, like if that's what you need and that's what you want to do, go for it. But that's why we have the clientele that we do, and we're not working with we have a specific person that we're trying to get to.
That's exactly right. You're going to have, not every person is going to align and be your core customer, the person you're really trying to reach. But for those who are, they are going to so value what you do and so appreciate it that it would be foolish not to say, okay, let's do business. Like let's do this together.
And we're not even we're mid-level. Yeah. Like we're not the most expensive. The guys up in Harrisburg are, but they give something that we can't even provide. Like they have, the big banisters and the TVs and the light shows and the spinning records with their logos on it and the fancy tables. And we're just not there yet. And maybe we probably won't ever be, but like we know where we're at and what we offer, and it's at that price point. And this is why we do it.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. So you call people to action then when you realize that it's a great fit. And then that action is either going to lead to success or failure. And so spelling out what success looks like for your client, if you come and do this, if you buy this product, if you join our club, if you hire us for these services, this is what success looks like. If you don't do it though, here's what possible consequences are. And that's another one where people really struggle to spell out the failure because they don't want to sound creepy.
Right.
They don't want to be that late night infomercial guy, that's really hassling people and trying to scare them into making a sale. And I get that. I totally get that. But what people don't do because of that fear is they're not clear with people as to, like, if you go with this other company or if you don't do anything, we just know that here are the potential pitfalls of that. Not to scare you, but to just give you a real good picture of both what success and failure
So how does a business and organization, how do they do that well? Like, how do they call customers to action well? Where I think, and we had talked about this prior to put on the headphones and set up the mics here, about just how it often feels like sleazy for customers or for businesses to call their customers to action, because like they don't want to seem pushy. They don't want to feel like that, stereotypical used car salesman or the late night infomercial salesman. So how do organizations find that balance of being confident in their ask? And
here's something that's so interesting about late night salesmen. No one turns the TV on to the shopping network because they're looking for a solution to a particular problem. People are they're channel flipping, or they're super bored, or they're waiting for Cartoon Network, Adult Swim to get back from commercial break.
Check some Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty. So let's say they're flipping through. So that late night salesman is trying to offer you a solution to a problem you don't have. Right?
I didn't know that I needed liquid rubber that I can spray on anything.
I mean, when you're sitting there wondering, like, do my knives cut through pennies? I'm not even sure if they do.
Right.
And now I feel like I really need that because he told me I did. They are having to position their product in a way to actually answer a question you're not asking.
Yeah.
It's a totally different ball game. Whereas if you have a product, like it's on a website or marketing cloud or whatever that is, the reason I'm going to find that product is because I'm actually have a problem and I'm looking for a solution to it. I am hoping that you have so if I go online and I'm looking like, best online mattresses, and I'm trying to choose between Casper and Purple and whatever, how many other hundreds there are to choose from now.
40,000.
I have a particular, I'm
It's
not
all the
flipping through
same.
channels and then suddenly
all the
being
same.
convinced that I need a new mattress. I am looking for a mattress because I want one.
Yeah.
And I want the best one. And best for me may be different than best for you, Scott. I may want the highest quality no matter what the cost.
Well, I'm a side sleeper. How about you?
I'm a stomach and back. Yeah,
I'm all of those as well, actually.
I'm all up in here. So best is going to be different for us depending on what we're looking for. So those companies need to position themselves in ways to tell you exactly what they're great at, so that you can figure out if it's a good fit for you. And man, if it's going to solve the problem that I have, I am ecstatic about handing you the money to do that.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about looking creepy or gross because I'm asking for the sale. I want to give you money if you're going to solve my problem.
So do you feel like most businesses like just fail on this? Like,
Yes.
Is that pretty safe to say that most businesses don't do this well?
Most businesses fail on this. They don't ask for the sale.
Can you think of any examples of businesses off the top of your head? And if you can't, that's okay. But can you think of any businesses that are just like killing it in this way, that they're just doing a really good job?
Yeah, if you go, there's some websites you can go to. I mean, it tends to be businesses that are larger. One of the reasons they have success is because of that.
Yeah.
But if you go to like Geico's website, for instance, and what is like Geico has done such a good job of clarifying their message. Right, 15 minutes or less could save you 15% or more. Like, this is such a good, memorable, and very clear. Right, if you want to save money on your insurance. May not be the best insurance. If you want to save money on your insurance.
Right.
And let's talk about even the internal external problem there.
Yeah.
The external problem is I need insurance. The internal problem, the angst that we all kind of feel, is that most of us don't feel like we really understand the insurance market very well. And we're all kind of afraid that we're getting taken advantage of. And Geico is taking that fear that we all have and they're saying like, yeah, you probably are. Like, you're probably getting taken advantage of. And so we're not going to take advantage of you. Our sales pitch is very clear. Like 15 minutes or less could save you 50% or more. Come to our website. That's the problem that we'll solve for you. And car insurance shouldn't be this difficult. So if you go to their website, scroll up to the top here, like they just have it, like you put in your zip code on their website and it's a start quote. Like that's it. That's the whole website is just, let's start doing business with each other. We're going to tell you what to expect. Mm-hmm. And they're asking for this. It's literally the only thing their homepage is doing is asking for a sale.
Right.
There's nothing else here.
That's interesting. No. Like you can choose to look at auto, homeowners, renters, like their business is obviously
but it's
very complex, but it's all distilled.
It's super complex, but they're just distilling it down to just the different types of options that they have for insurance. You click that, it's still asking you for the sale. The next thing is like start a quote, basically.
It doesn't even go anywhere.
Which is such a fascinating shift. Like when you look at big companies who just organizationally are just immensely complex.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And then
you look at like market is immensely complex.
Yeah, and then you look at like just a typical like mom and pop shop. Yeah. Whose business is, for all intents and purposes, like pretty succinct.
It's fairly straightforward.
But like the communication and how that actually like plays out online and the content choices that they make, like it's incredible when you look at something like the example of Geico, where just how succinct that is versus a lot of other websites you see with a business who's not near as complex, but you wouldn't realize that by just looking at their homepage.
Right. And if you so let's take websites as an example, because I want to say a few things that might be helpful to people listening, like just easy things you could implement right away. Most websites need to pass every website should pass the grunt test. Most of them don't. So a grunt test in StoryBrand language is that within about 5 seconds, I should be able to tell what you offer, why it would help me, and how I take a next step with you. I should be able to see those things immediately. And if I get on your website and it's really unclear as to what it is that you do, it's really unclear as to how that's even helpful for me, and it's very unclear as to how to get started, that's a real problem. People's attention span is so limited. So in your upper left-hand corner of the website, you're going to want that like company name and a little bit of a tagline that's going to tell people right away what it is you do, just something about it. The upper right-hand corner, you want a button that I would call, StoryBrand calls the Marry Me button. Yeah. It just says like, you know what, here's how to get started with this. And it's usually a different color. It should be a very lickable button. It should be a sexy button. Because they've done a lot of eye tests on where the eyes naturally go on a web page.
It's a Z, right?
It's a Z, yeah. And your most valuable real estate is that upper right-hand corner, because it's not the first thing they see. It's the second. But if you can have, so if you don't have a really clear call to action in the upper right-hand, you're unnecessarily losing business right away. And then that hero image with some kind of like tag in the middle that says exactly what you do and saying, and clearly, right? So a couple of examples of this. It's good to say we help nonprofits do more. Okay, that's okay. That kind of tells me. Right. It's way better to say we help nonprofits with their bookkeeping by providing affordable, top of the line bookkeepers. Right. That's way better. Right. Because if that like you're also helping nonprofits do more, but I want to know what you do for me immediately, and just that clarity of that is just way better.
That's fascinating. So, Levi, if you could go back real quick, I'm going to put you on the spot here. But Levi, just for you listeners, just pulled up his own website, sparksentertainment.com, Sparks with an X. And if you're okay, Levi, I would actually be curious to have Josh, this is the first time he's seeing the website, just critique it in real time. Would you be open to that?
Do it.
So yeah, if you're listening along when you get home, sparksentertainment.com, SPARKX Entertainment.
Depending on how quickly Levi makes changes, it may or may not look like this. When you look at
Y'all better hurry up.
All right, so Sparks Entertainment is totally fine on your upper left-hand corner there. Yep. I'd love to see probably a little bit of Sparks Entertainment. You could be a movie theater, right? Or you could be a DJ, which like you are. You could be any. You could be. We do inflatables for children's events. I mean, it could be almost anything. So I'd love to see something up there that gives a little more definition.
So does Levi need to hire me as?
So that was our struggle. This logo is brand new, just this year.
I like the logo because we never no problem with the logo.
Yeah, because we never really had one, and we struggled with like having those services into that logo or into that space. And it was a never ending change. Like, we started DJing, then we added video, then we added photography. Next year we'll probably add a photo booth. You know what I mean? So it never really would have been a defined set of like services or a name.
Sure.
So that's something that we do struggle with currently, or just are kind of figuring out.
So the other piece, the get a free quote, I would put that on the far right.
Yep.
I think that's probably that's a pretty solid call to action. I would like to see it again underneath so he's got some copy here that says treating every wedding and event as if it was our own. You want to put, so the marry me button, whatever that is, if it's get a free quote, if it's schedule an appointment, if it's, buy now, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You want to see that really is the thing you're building your entire homepage around, because you want that call to action to be the thing. Like, if you're looking for your website to generate more business and leads, then it has to be that you're constantly reminding people how to take their next step with you.
Right.
So the get a quote, if that's the best, I don't know if that's the best next step for you, but if that is, then you want that on your homepage at least 7 times.
Right. Wait, so to pause right there real quick, like 7 times. I know we've had interactions I've had multiple interactions with clients where it's like that feels so pushy. Of like that, having that marry me button, that call to action, just repeated, even just a couple times for a lot of clients, feels overbearing. Like you're pushing too hard. So like, what would you say to clients that say, "Whoa, Josh, you have it in the header. That's all you really need." Like, why do you have it multiple times throughout the homepage?
Yeah, because first of all, I tell them to calm down and probably take a Xanax, and then I find that people are just much more likely to be open to new recommendations if they're a little drugged up. So that's a joke, by the way. I don't know your audience at all. So,
yeah.
Pastor. Okay,
don't do drugs.
Don't do drugs, yes. Because it's the 80s and I like Nancy Reagan. So if we were to... so what I would tell people is a lot of times when the website concept is presented to them, they see the whole kind of homepage wireframed up in one visual. Like, they don't... A lot of times when it's presented to them, they don't scroll down and see.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times if you look at it that way, you're going to see all 7 or 8 or 9 or however many you have those marry me buttons in one look, which is not the way anyone will experience it on the website. But if you're kind of looking at it from a backed up view, it feels so pushy to see all 7, 8, 9 of those buttons at the same time. So that's a real mistake. Don't ever show, like, if you're a web developer, don't ever show a client the website like that, because that's not how anyone will ever experience that website.
Right.
So if I like to think of the website in sections, so it's not just marry me all down the road, but every section should be basically, above the fold is a way to talk about a screenshot. Someone will see it at the same time. You should be offering value with every single section. So here's how we make you the hero. Here's how we solve your problem. Here's how, every section should offer value. And then the marry me button is at the end of that value statement, that value section, whatever it is. It's a reminder. If you want to take your next step, here's how you do it. So then next section, here's how we offer value. If you want to take your next step with us, here's how you do it. So it's a convenience thing, because with every section, you're providing people the way in which you're going to help them. And then the marry me button is a convenience, so that if they're convinced after 2 or 3 sections, they don't need to read 7. They just want to take the next step.
Is it important to have that call to action be consistent throughout?
Yes.
So like if it's get a free quote, so if we scroll down on Sparks Entertainment, get a free quote, and then we scroll down, what we offer, DJ services, photography, videography, learn more under each. And then if you keep scrolling down, we see contact us, get started now. Is it important for all of those to say, get a free quote, or is it okay to vary the language?
Yeah, so contact us is one of the most useless buttons you can have on a website, because
contact us,
because it's so ambiguous. It's so ambiguous as to what that means.
Sure.
So studies have been done find that, like, people are fine to scroll. They'll scroll. I am actually for really long homepages. You can have it almost infinitely long, but people do not like clicking, because I know this is ridiculous, guys, but like, truthfully, if we don't know what's on the other side of that click, we don't want to take the time to do it.
But just with what you just said, based on at least my experience, you're like the 1%, because literally you would not believe how many clients we have that come to us that want everything above the fold, because they believe that their customers will not scroll down.
But that's just old thinking, correct?
It is. No, trust me, it is. But like literally every client we deal with has at some point said, well, what if they don't scroll down? Then they won't see this. And it just blows my mind.
Yeah, so the issue is it's objectively untrue that their client would rather click than scroll. That is like, there's reams of data on this.
Mm-hmm.
You're much more likely to scroll than to click.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah.
Objectively untrue.
It's objectively false. I'll say it that way.
Your customers will scroll. Yeah. They will not click.
They will scroll. They will not click. Yeah. They will. Don't get me wrong. If your website is good enough, hopefully they'll be willing to do both.
Right.
But if there's
if you
a
need
lot
a great
more
website,
friction,
you can contact
there's
Pixel
a lot more
Hammer.
friction to leave the thing you're on now and go to another thing than to just keep scrolling, especially in the age of iPads and smartphones. And most of your clients are going to have over 50% of their traffic coming from mobile devices, whether those be tablets or phones. It's so much easier.
More than that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm saying over 50. So, but it's for many, it's going to be. So our churches, we have a couple of campuses and, a fairly significant web presence. I think about 65% of our traffic comes from mobile devices. And that's with a fairly broad age spectrum that's attached to our church.
So that was going to be my next question. Is that age specific, or is that kind of across all traffic? Like even
your web presence, okay, so let's talk about who you should be reaching on the web. 'Cause this is helpful, hopefully. Okay, so a number of studies have shown too that if you pick a core customer that's younger, you're actually going to reach far more people than if you pick a core customer that is older in general. I'm making broad generalizations here, right?
Okay.
So because there's a cell phone company, what is it, Cricket, the cell phone company? So they're advertising almost exclusively to seniors, and that works really well for them. So I'm not saying every single industry, but the idea is that everybody wants to be young, and our culture is terrified of death, and so we all want to pretend like we're on a Levi's commercial on the beach with fireworks all the time, no matter how old we are. So Apple, this is a great example. Apple does not ever. I'm 36 years old. I have 2 kids and a wife at home. Apple has no one like me on their commercials anymore.
Right.
Everybody on Apple commercials is in their 20s. They're carefree. They're dancing on the wall while listening to their AirPods, and they're super thin.
That goes out with the kids.
That's right.
Your relevance just disappears
have enough
overnight.
time for the gym anymore.
Yeah.
So I am not there's no one who looks like me on Apple's commercial.
Right.
But there's a part of me that wants to still, even though I have children and I never sleep and I'm tired all the time, and there's a part of me that wants to pretend I'm still young and carefree and
right.
And I love AirPods. So Apple's advertising still works for me, even though I'm not really present on that advertising. And it also works for people. I mean, my dad's favorite product in his lifetime, I think, is the Apple Watch. He loves his Apple Watch.
That's fascinating.
He's 64 years old now. So Apple's advertising, most of their advertising is geared toward 20 to 32 years old probably, but it works way beyond that. Whereas if you gear your advertising for someone in their 60s or 70s, you can really kill it with 60 and 70-year-olds, but it doesn't scale down. Nobody in their 20s wants to buy something that's advertised specifically to people in their 60s.
Right.
So when you're thinking about your web presence, you tend to it's more likely that you're going to get people who are younger with the web presence than people who are very old. I would always try to advertise younger with the web presence. You may have other marketing collateral that tries to target, a more middle-aged or even later-aged person. But if the question is, well, our old clients of ours won't know to scroll down, that's a terrible argument. Most of your web business is not going to be from your older clients. They're not finding you on the web. They're finding you because of that ad you placed in ARP magazine, right? So
that's such an interesting shift. That's really
it is, and it's not. Again, I want to be really clear here. It's not that your company shouldn't value older people. I mean, those are the people sometimes with the most disposable income, all that kind of stuff. It's that you've got to know who is most likely to find you through what marketing means.
And that reminds me of, again, a conversation that we had before we started the podcast here today. Of you found as a pastor that the more specific you would get in your sermons of using specific illustrations, stories that from your life, with your kids, you've found that actually has broader appeal. So the more specific that you get,
it is.
You've had broader appeal.
Yeah, even in sermons. So Like, for instance, I did a sermon a few years ago, and the whole point of my sermon was that God is calling us to change. He's calling all of us to change. But that as we change, there's a loss that's inherent to our own changing that is going to make us resistant toward walking toward the change that we actually desperately need. And so the idea is that basically change is loss. There's no getting away from that. So I started using these very personal examples in that sermon, but it was in actually making them very personal that they had a more universal appeal. So I basically said, like, my son Jack, he's 5 now, but he was probably 2 at the time. And I remember saying that day, I have a 2-year-old, and there is no problem in the world he has right now that me picking him up and rocking him and singing to him and telling him I love him like doesn't solve. But that won't always be the case. Like, there's going to come a time when that teacher tells him he can't do it, or that girl rejects him, or he doesn't make the basketball team, and I'm not able to provide that comfort for him. It's healthy. Like, as we grow up, it's healthy that every problem can't be solved with our parents scooping us up and rocking us to sleep. And that's a change that we welcome. But there's a real loss to it. Like, to be able to solve all of your kids' problems by picking them up is the best feeling in the world. And so I want that for him, but there's real loss involved. Dropping him, he started kindergarten this week. So his mom drops him off at kindergarten that very first day, and we're thrilled for him. He's growing. And my son Jack, he's on the autism spectrum. We had no idea if he would be able to start kindergarten as a 5-year-old, and he is. Like, we're celebrating. We're so excited about him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But man, seeing him walk into that school, that's hard. It's like this is a whole different era we're walking into, and this little boy who's been so carefree and helpless, he's about to inherit. You start school, you're walking into real world problems soon.
Yeah.
There's a loss involved to that. Change is loss, and every change that we have, even the necessary with the good ones, like, there's going to be a component of loss to it. And I realized that if I would actually take these very specific examples from my own life and talk about the very hard loss, like, I would see people who maybe don't even have kids, or they had kids a long time ago. They get it, though. Like, that totally makes sense for them. So there's this universal appeal to these very specific examples.
Just going to give that a moment of silence and let that sink. That was, that's gold, man. That's great.
Well, that's why a lot of companies make the mistake then of just generally saying, like, yeah, we'll make you better. But you got, the more specific you can get, the more specifically you can identify your core customers' problems. Right. The more specifically you can identify what the success would look like for them by giving customer testimonials, by telling stories. Like, it's just, you're going to win. And so for me, to answer your earlier question, why was this framework, this way of thinking about it, helpful to a church pastor? Here's what I can say now that I would have struggled. It was something I sensed before, but having walked through StoryBrand, I get it now. The church in the United States is becoming increasingly irrelevant. And every study you look at from Pew Research or Barna or anywhere else, people are walking away from the church. Why are they doing that? Well, because we are no longer telling a story that's answering the external, internal, and philosophical problems that people are feeling.
Right.
So let's talk about the 1950s, because it's basically everyone's favorite topic. Don Draper and all that. Okay, so Billy Graham has wild success evangelizing in the 1950s. Okay. Going around tent revivals, hundreds of thousands of people choosing to come to God over that time.
So when they were like the big tents. They didn't have like physical buildings. They just went to cities, store
Crusades,
up, tear down.
Stadiums, everything.
Yeah.
Millions of people over the 50s, 60s, and 70s come. And so I started asking the question, why is the same, like, you can present the gospel the exact same way Billy Graham did in the 50s and 60s, and it's like it doesn't come back with the kind of results today as it did back then. Why is that? Well, so what was happening in the 1940s worldwide? That was a pretty big deal?
World War something?
World War II. World War II is happening.
One of the world wars.
One of those wars.
One of them World War things.
Take your pick.
Japan was involved.
So in the 1940s, guys, and into the 1950s, everyone remembers World War II.
Right.
Everyone in the United States is thinking about death. Like, most people have lost a loved one, or they know, or a friend, or someone they know, right? So they're all thinking about death. And when you think about death, you start to think about the afterlife as well. So people like have that on the mind. The other thing that's true in the 50s that's not true anymore is that in the 1950s, like most people in the United States, I think I'm like, when I say most, I just mean a majority, would have believed that there was a God, would have believed like, even if I'm not in church on Sunday, like I probably should be, like there's,
Right.
you know, or that there's a holy God that has some kind of call in my life and I'm probably not living up to it. Like, even people who were far from church or any kind of organized religion kind of had that general sense. Like that was not a strange or alien idea or concept to them.
Interesting.
So Billy Graham comes in the 1950s and he does this amazing thing. He says essentially that impulse you have, that there's more to life than what you're experiencing now, that even after this life is over, there's an afterlife.
Right.
That there's a holy God, that you're not living up to his standards. That impulse you have, or all those things, it's true. You're right. But here's the wonderful thing. God loves you. And he loves you so much that he sent Jesus to take all of the horrors of this world on himself and create a way for you to spend an eternity with him after this life is over, and to forgive you of all those ways that you have fallen short of his glory and his goodness. And so people hear that message, and it solves an existential problem that they're having at the time. And they come forward in droves to say, like, whatever this solution is, right? Like this Jesus solution to my problem, I totally want it. Okay, so it's 2018, and we no longer have a culture that thinks about death anymore at all. Like, in fact, we do everything we can to avoid thinking about death.
Yep.
And so no one's got questions about the afterlife. And if you talk to most people now, they think people who talk about heaven a lot are weird, and people who talk about hell are just insane because like they can't imagine an existence like that. So the whole heaven-hell dichotomy that, you know, Billy Graham was able to tap into is no longer like a front door into the gospel at all.
Right.
What's also interesting is that, and I'm sorry, I'm a pastor, so this is about to be a little Christian.
We're going in pastor mode. Gear up.
What's also really interesting is that the New Testament has this book of Acts, and it's really the story of the first century church. What's so interesting is that there's about 12 or 13 sermons in the book of Acts that the very first Christians gave to people to tell them why they should choose to follow Jesus or align their life around him.
Yeah.
And none of them talk about hell. Not once.
Really?
They don't mention it at all.
Which is bizarre. Like, so for me, having grown up in the church, that feels like hell is like a central tenet of Christianity.
Hell is a central tenet of American Western Christianity because Billy Graham had so much success with it in the 50s and 60s.
That's amazing.
So what I'm not saying is, because like if there are Christians listening to this and starting to die inside because they think I'm denying the power of Jesus. Like, so what I want to say, I'm not saying that those apostles didn't believe that the choice to follow Jesus or not didn't have eternal ramifications. I think they totally did. Jesus seems to indicate that repeatedly. What I'm saying is when those people left the Jewish audience they had and went and started talking to the Romans had no concept of an afterlife in the way that the Jews did. And so they don't position that message to answer that question. We assume that that's a topic that would have come up, they would have talked about at some point, but it's not the way they introduce it, because that's not the question people were asking. Christianity has always been then, even since the first century, since the book of Acts, has always been primarily about a person to run to, not something to run from. But in the 50s and 60s, it was easier to position it as something to run from, like, you know, because that's what people had on their minds.
Right.
So Billy Graham, I don't think he does anything disingenuous at all, but he takes this natural fear that people have and thought that they have, and he says, like, yeah, that impulse, that's correct. That's part of the gospel. It is part of the gospel.
Right.
And he says, like, I'm going to position, I want you to see that, like, that Jesus is the answer to that question. So, but that's not the question people are asking in 2018. I actually think in 2018, the question that people have a lot is, I think the biggest sin in the United States today is unfulfilled potential. It's why we have our kids in 15 different club soccer like, we don't want to be the reason they don't get that D1 scholarship, right? We don't want to be the reason they don't eventually like succeed and become the next LeBron James. We don't want to be the reason that they're not, you know, writing symphonies and like running large organizations. So we get our kids into everything we possibly can. It's why when you go on the Amazon bestseller list, like over and over, it's self-help books, it's books about self-actualization, it's books about emotional intelligence, it's
how
books
to make
about leadership,
friends,
how to make friends, influence enemies, all that kind of stuff. It's just up and down the line. All right, so what people are scared to death of right now is not the afterlife. They're scared to death of not living into their full potential.
Right, a legacy.
And, leaving a legacy and living a life of purpose.
Man.
And so that's the question people are asking. So if you're going to talk about Jesus and Christianity in the 21st century, the way to position that is not to start with heaven and hell. It's to start with the question people are actually asking. And you want to talk about external, internal, and philosophical problems. Oh, my goodness. The gospel has so much to say about those things, which is to say, like, I'm afraid I'm not going to live into my potential. That's a major internal problem. But the way it often expresses itself is in external ways. Like, I'm afraid I'm not going to get that raise at the company. I'm afraid my spouse is not going to think that I'm, as like worthy of love. I'm afraid that I'm going to be a bad parent. And really what's underneath all of that is I'm afraid I'm not going to be the person I was created to be. I'm afraid I'm not going to live into my purpose. So Jesus has tons to say about that, about how, your worth is not found in what you accomplish. It's found in who you were created to be. You were created by an all-loving God who loves you infinitely no matter what you ever accomplish. That's who you are. You're a son or a daughter of God. So to start with that, that's the question people are asking, and Jesus has tons of answers for it. That's the place to start.
Listen, I think it's fascinating. I unlike both of you, I didn't grow up in church. Went a little bit as a teenager because of stepdad and just what he believed in, and it just kind of it faded, and it's not something that I do currently. And I think it's fascinating how you've taken that and you've worked in what you do with the StoryBrand and the messaging and other companies and basically just everything that we just talked about when relating back to my business and Pixel and Hammer and the people you work with, and you just like so simplified it down to, well, this is exactly what the Bible and the church is about and all this. And I think that's very fascinating. And when we said about legacy, it reminded me of this. I'm sure you've heard the name or you know who he is, but I'm kind of in a love-hate relationship with Gary Vee, and he said the other day in a video how so yin and yang he is with his which is his mental state and everywhere he is, whereas like he knows he's the best and he's better than everybody else. But if he dies tomorrow, no one's going to give a shit. And like, that's how like he sees it. And he's always preaching about like, I'm doing this for the legacy. Like, yeah, my dream is to buy the jets, but like when it comes down to it, like I want everybody to know that I did it the best. I was the best. This is my legacy. I want people to look up to me and be who I want to be. But like at the same time, he knows that like we still live in this world, in this universe, in this reality of like, cool, that's my goal, but like if I'm gone tomorrow, in 20 years nobody's going to remember who Gary Vee was, kind of thing. Right. So he's like on that yin and yang, and he understands. I feel like that all that just even though it's maybe wasn't meant to be, or you just kind of found the key, I think all that still just relates back to everything you just said with the guy in the 50s and the tents and the church and how it's progressed and where we're going and where we're at. It's just, it fascinates me, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's this so I forget the name of the book, which is going to be totally unhelpful for any of your listeners.
we have Google, so if Friday, you can give me words.
It's 4:30. I'll start talking, and if you find it fantastic. Yeah. There's a guy who wrote a book a few years ago. He's actually an atheist, and I think this is very fascinating. But he talked about the purpose of existence, and his wife had died early on. This is not going to be enough for a Google search, but good luck. His wife had died, and he's reflecting then on her death. And he doesn't necessarily believe in an afterlife, but he also knows his wife to such a degree that he would be able to essentially tell you what she would do in any particular situation. And there's a way in which like she lives on in his mind and in his life. And the way that she's invested in him then, like his life is different and he sees the world differently. And I can speak from personal experience to this. When I first got married, my wife is so much kinder than I am, like so much. Scott
I can speak from firsthand experience. A resounding yes.
So when we first got married, man, anyone who like was unkind to me, I would just immediately be willing to write them off as human beings. Like basically, if you're not nice to me, I assume you're a terrible person.
Yep.
And my wife would actually, in such careful and cautious ways, wait till I had calmed down. So a week, a month, 7 years later. And she would say, hey, I realize that they were very unhelpful in this way, but they are a good father. And so realize that this one interaction you had with them does not define them as a human being, and that they are so much more than this interaction. And so my wife, probably more than anybody else in my life, really helped me with my own emotional intelligence, my own ability to be empathetic toward other people and to see from other perspectives. And so if my family were to pass away tragically, next week, there's a way in which my wife has impacted every interaction I've had with every human being over the last 15 years of my life, will continue to, and that'll impact other interactions that those people have with other people because of the work that my wife did in this world.
Wow.
And even if you're a person who's like not of faith and you struggle with afterlife concepts, the idea that what you do in this life matters and that it reverberates throughout eternity because it continues to get passed on from person to person to person to person is important. And it means that how we live today matters. Like, and how we treat each other, it matters. And so to be able to take this, these are marketing concepts where you could say, well, yeah, business, it's business. Yeah, but like this stuff, when you start to understand how you can talk about what's most important in the life of your clients, you can change their lives, man. And so these are ways that I've adopted this and said, like, okay, this is how it impacts the church, and this is how it can impact many other people. But for so many of you you're doing good work in the world, and whether that's explicitly a nonprofit or Christian or a Muslim or anything else that like is doing good work, like, or if it's just like, yeah, we're in business to make money, yes, but we're going to provide this thing for our clients. Like, that work continues to do good work in the world and continues to reverberate. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to ask for the sell. Don't be afraid to ask people to do business with you, because what you're doing is good and necessary, and people need to be a part of it.
That's awesome. Man, we're running out of time here, but I want to do a quick little lightning round. So just give me a quick hit bullet point. We're going to zoom the lens way in, super practical, real quick. What pitfalls do many businesses and organizations fall into, and why are these problems?
I've addressed this, but really positioning yourself as the hero instead of your client is the biggest one, I think. It's so easy to fall into the pitfall of talking about yourself constantly and how great you are. Talk about how great your client could be if they do business with you. That's the biggest one. It's the lowest hanging fruit, and it's something that every company should be thinking about.
So what advice would you give to somebody, for a lot of our listeners who might not be, the head of an organization, the boss, the CEO, whatever? What advice would you give to the middle management, the employee that has to answer to a boss, to a board, whoever, that might want to implement some of these strategies, these ways of thinking, but don't have buy-in from their higher ups? Like, what steps could they take?
Yeah, so it's hard to lead when you're not in charge, when you're sitting second chair, but there's an art to that. One of the things you're going to want to do is cast a vision for what could be, but it's very hard to cast a vision for what could be without setting what is on fire. So some of the best advice I ever got, I used to think if I could just cast a really compelling vision for where we should go, like what the there was, like let's go from here to there, right? And if I could just cast a vision for how compelling there was, people would be like, yeah, let's do it, let's charge the hill, let's take it, let's be a part of this new thing. But truthfully, what you have to do is you have to build a there. Like, so let's pretend we're in a jungle, we're on a platform, we're here. We
Right.
build a there platform over there, and we build a bridge from here to there then. And we're just telling people, like, you just need to go on this bridge. What you have to do before people will go to that other platform is set the current one on fire. So you have to talk to people about, like, why it is irresponsible to stay where we are, why we are losing business if we stay where, why we are not helping the world or helping people. Like, you have to help people understand why the place we're at right now, it's totally undeniable that if we stay here, we're toast, we're not making the impact we can. Then they're thirsty, they're hungry to, okay, so what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? And you've got to attack their here first before they're willing to go there.
Yeah, and I've said it on this podcast before, and it's like, it's literally exactly what you just said. Like, the company I work for prior to here, quick backdraw, they $30 million a year, home improvement stuff, and like, dude is spending $100,000 a month on advertising. A lot of that is going into TV and billboards. TV we get because we get the older generations who can afford to remodel their stuff and blah blah blah.
Yeah, sure.
But the billboards, there's no way to track that measurement. There's no way to figure it out. And we're spending like $30,000 a year on billboard, or a month on billboards. Yeah. Like, my salary in a month on billboards, like, you know what I mean? And like, I would tell them constantly, meeting after meeting after meeting, marketing, what can we do different? What can we do better? I said, put this $30,000 into Facebook ads.
Oh, man.
And nobody bought it.
That's so much.
Nobody.
That's so much in a Facebook ads. Too.
Nobody
Yeah,
believed me,
it's
and I
awesome.
literally went
heartbreaking.
into those meetings and said, look, if you put this amount of money, take those stupid billboards down because nobody cares about them. They see it, they laugh, they think it's cool, they see it, maybe they call in, but they don't actually buy. Put it into these Facebook ads, and you'll make 12 times as much, and you'll turn your 30 million into 50 in like a matter of a year. But I was just the young dumb kid who thought Facebook was cool, and like I just didn't set those billboards on fire.
Yeah, you've got to set it on fire, man.
Right. Next time.
Grow younger, everybody.
Yep.
Your youth has a lot to say.
Yeah, it's true. Oh man, I always want those young guns in the room, even if they have. So the criticism that younger people get a lot is that they're just overly idealistic, and that's true, and that's exactly why you need them in the room with you, because they have not become jaded and cynical like you have been, and it's very rare that a company, an organization, or a group of people change the world, like actually make a dent in the universe, to take a Steve Jobsism. But when it happens, it's usually because there was a group of people who were convinced that it was possible. And so if you don't listen to the idealists, I'm not saying they usually can't run the company. But if you don't have them in the room to say, like, why are we doing this? Or like, what's the goal of it? Or just to question the status quo, you're really shortchanging the entire organization by saying, oh, well, they're not ready for that responsibility. No, let them in the room. Invite them in. Be glad that they're there. They're going to say some stupid stuff. Like, just know that's going to happen. But they're going to provide you some jewels occasionally that you don't get any other way if they're not there. So, wow.
Yep.
That's a total aside. But for
that is the time that we have today. Josh, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Beautiful episode. I can't wait to listen back. Where can people find out more about you, StoryBrand, anything? What do you have to plug?
Yep, StoryBrand.com is a great website to go to. I'm one of the guides on that, but there's a ton of great guides there. So wherever you are throughout the country, that's a great place to find one who's local, if that's helpful for you, or to connect with me. You can email me if you're interested in going forward at Josh Crain. That's Josh CRAIN.com. You can find me on Twitter at Josh Crain, JoshCrain. My church is the Meeting House. Love that group of people. It's an awesome congregation, and we have awesome folks there. Would love for you to check that out if you're in South Central PA. That's tmh.church. And I think that's enough. Social media.
Thanks so much for listening today. Josh, it's been amazing having you. Thanks for sharing your heart and your wisdom and your insight. I know that my life has been enriched because of it. And I hope that for our listeners today, they get a taste of that. So thank you so much for being here, man.
My pleasure, guys. It's been super fun.
Yep. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been another episode of the Agency Hour podcast. All links that Josh mentioned and anything else that we have to offer will be in the description down below. Thanks for listening. Have a good day, everybody.